and Scripture walks in agreement, finding the tune can be the challenge, because sometimes we get lost in that journey, right? And finding the tune is the challenge. Now, Jesus has already given us a moment here in the text where if we could come into this agreement, this idea, rallied around Him, man, what could we accomplish? And we've all seen that happen, where people come together with the focus of shining the light on Jesus, and then great things happen. In fact, I'm going to say you're probably here as a result of somebody agreeing with somebody else, and you ended up being in the middle of that river. A message, a ministry, a song, a statement, whatever it took that brought you into that place, and then you were able to sort of flow in the middle of that because someone was in agreement. So in some ways we see how the symphony works with just us, because we're here and we're believers. But not everything is designed to flow together. We have to find what's designed to flow together. Let me give you an example. Luke chapter 5. Go here real quick, just to show you a text that's pretty popular in circles of teaching of the New Covenant, because it's one of those passages that we use to sort of define what the covenant is and what the covenant isn't. Luke chapter 5, verse 36, Jesus spoke a parable to His disciples. And He said, "No one puts a piece from a new garment on an old one. Otherwise, the new makes a tear. And also the piece that was taken out of the new does not match the old." Popular verse that basically says you don't take a new patch and put it on an old pair of pants, because the old is not going to be able to hold the strength of the new, and what will eventually happen? It'll just fall apart. It's really only going to last so long, in other words. By putting a new patch, you don't make the pants new, you just prolong the life temporarily, and eventually it all rips out anyway, and it was really just a Band-Aid over an open wound. And so Jesus says those things don't match, they don't go together. And no one puts new wine in old wineskins, else the new wine bursts the wineskins and it's spilled and the wineskins are ruined, but new wine must be put into new wineskins and both are preserved. And we've taken this verse and these verses, and I think rightfully so, to mean that you can't take the new, the freshness, the power of the new covenant, and you can't mix and mingle it with that old staleness of an old covenant, because it won't work together. But here's what we might miss. Go back to the end of verse 36. The piece that was taken out of the new does not match the old, and the word match there is the Greek word symphonio. It's the same word Jesus used when He said, if you could agree on any one thing, man, what could you accomplish? He uses the word symphony. He says, when you take the new and you stick it into the old, they don't sing the same song. They're not a symphony. They're two different songs playing on two different frequencies in two different keys. And while that song might have worked in that room and this song works in this room, these two songs cannot play together in the same symphony. And He says, you can't mix that which is new with that which is old. Because why? Because they're not the same symphonic sound. And this is why you have to read some of what you read back here differently than you read some of what you read up here. And be careful trying to make two different songs in two different keys sing the same thing, because they don't. Now we might say, yes, but it's all the Bible, but it's not all the same symphony. And if I can discover the core of that symphony, then I'll be able to make a move towards understanding what God's trying to say to me. So what happens when it looks like the Bible itself is out of tune? Just what do we do? Just think about this with me for a moment. I mean, the Old Testament spends a lot of time, particularly in the Torah, with trying to tell you what you can eat and what you can't eat. And the list of stuff you can't eat is almost everything we ate last night. All right? So we go, okay, and we can say, okay, well, that's not in the new covenant, so we don't have to deal with that. Okay, that's an answer. The Old Testament spends a lot of time telling you how you're supposed to treat your slaves. We go, oh, well, that's not relevant for us. But the New Testament also tells you, if you're a slave, don't strive to be free. Serve your master with humility. You go, that's a toughie. Now we're going to deal with that one in detail tomorrow as we get into the song of the New Testament, what the New Testament's trying to sing, even when the note fluctuates once in a while. But just think about it, because that's there. A lot of time on how you're supposed to treat your slave. The Old Testament spends a lot of time on which enemies you're supposed to kill. Which members of the family are to die first when you kill them. How many of you know you've read your Old Testament and that's in there? And I know, we go, we're not under that. We're under a new covenant. We don't have to deal with that. But yet that sound is blasting forth from passages of our Old Testament. Or let's just say you can find it to books in the Old Testament. We got a book of erotic poetry in the Old Testament. So erotic, by the way, that you were not allowed to read it if you were Jewish until you were 30 years old. There's the Song of Solomon. Try teaching that one in children's church sometime. You're going to have to make Jesus the husband and the church the bride, and you're going to have to leave the sex out. And when you do that, there goes 99% of the book. That's in there. Is that the symphony that we read when we pick up our Bible? Not always, but that's there. How about a book about a woman who was raised in a king's harem and trained to pleasure the king properly so that he would pick her over all of her peers, and behind the scenes are betrayal and murder, and God's name never shows up once in the book? How about that one? That's in the Bible. That's the book of Esther. Is that part of the symphonic sound of Scripture? It's not what you open with when you try to introduce people to Jesus, I can guarantee you. How about a book that plays out first in the heavenlies, behind the scenes, and then plays out on the earth with actual characters like chess pieces on a board, and when the book ends, the main characters in the play are never informed about what happened behind the scenes, and we're not left with an answer as to why it happens. We're just left with the hope that when it happens, we'll end up with double that we had before. That is the book of Job. Gives us a lot of hope when we go through trouble, but it doesn't give us a lot of answers as to why, except we just go, well, it's all the devil. And that's kind of where people land at the end of Job and go, well, it's all the devil. And which opens up another can of worms, because we go, God's the one told him he could do it. And he doesn't even tell Job that at the end of the book and say, hey, here's why I did what I did. But we're still forced to wrestle with and contend with that book. It happens that, what about a book where a guy says there's really nothing new under the sun, everything you do is total vanity, total waste, and by the way, when you die, you're just like the animals, you are dead. You don't know anything, it's all over with. That is the book of Ecclesiastes. Now try preaching heaven and hell out of that book. Open that one up at a funeral sometime and see how much life you pour into people. I'm not mocking the word at all. I told you before, I love the contention and the wrestling that comes with the Bible, but I also want to be honest that some of these things are a little bit out of tune with the main sound of the Bible. They're a little bit out of tune with where we land. They're a little bit out of tune with the melody. That melody that progresses us, that moves us forward in the Scripture, because there's really a river. Like that old movie, A River Runs Through It. There's really a river that runs through the Bible. There's